Peeps, Kenny Molotov in the studio, and I'm going to be doing another Q&A. I got an awesome question from a brand new subscriber named Plum Life. First of all, guys, it means so much to me that you're getting a lot of good things from these vlogs. I'm so happy about that, and thank you so much for reaching out. Every time I get to talk to you guys and find out that you're into plumbing and you have questions, I mean, it means the world to me. It's so cool that we can actually come together as a community and talk about stuff like this. I'm gonna read to you what Plum Life sent me. Here we go. Plum Life: hey Kenny, new subscriber here. I also stumbled across your vids thanks to your plumbing content. I watched all of your blogs and plumbing related videos in one night and enjoyed all of them. Keep up the great work. Plum Life, thank you. That means the world to me. I'm glad they're helping you, and that's awesome that you watched them in one evening. Thanks, buddy. I'm 27 and I live in Australia. I have decided I want to pursue a career in plumbing. I watched your Q&A video, which was really helpful. I do have a question. I keep hearing from people, I have uncles and cousins in different trades, about how dirty plumbing is. I realize there are so many different types of plumbing, but I am curious, what is your perspective? And especially since you mentioned you primarily work on the service side of things, fixing things that are broken. Very true. I'd be particularly interested to get your thoughts on the topic and maybe hear about some of your good or bad experiences about the job being dirty. Thanks, Kenny. Keep up the great work. Plum Life, let's do this. I'm gonna tell you guys the 3 worst experiences I've ever had with drain calls, because they're really funny but really horrible when they're going on. I don't know if you've ever had a moment like that where it's like, I can't believe this is happening to me, but it makes such a great story at the end of it. Number 1, here's what happens. My dad and I get a call to go to a farm, actually, and this is a customer that we have that's really wealthy, and she has a ton of different properties all around, and she calls us to go to this farm one day, and she goes, look, I have a couple of tenants that rent out this farm, but it's literally on just a plot of land, right? So it's not hooked up into an actual city system. In other words, it's got a septic tank connection. Okay, now if you don't know what a septic tank is, it's essentially a tank that collects all of your fecal matter and debris, and it goes into this tank, and this tank is primed with bacteria to break down everything that goes into it. Okay, here's the story. My dad and I get called to this place, and we realize it's a farm and realize that the drain is backed up. All the water is essentially coming out from the sinks. Now there are a couple of layers that make this a little bit worse, and the first layer is that when we go to the basement is actually lower than the lowest pipe. In other words, in most houses now, if you go into the basement, your lowest pipe is in the floor of your basement. We go into this farm and their lowest pipe is above my head in the basement, right? Big problem right then and there, because that means that the entire drain that's hanging over my head is completely full of everything, and then to make it worse, it's also connected to a septic tank, so everything that has ever been used has gone into the septic tank and has stayed there for bacteria to break it down. So it doesn't go anywhere to get filtered, it stays right there. Needless to say, my dad and I go through a couple of scenarios of how to unclog this drain, and we eventually decide there's no way to do it except to cut this pipe and send the snake through it till it hits the septic tank. Essentially, what we ended up realizing was the entire first floor was full of water. So if you opened any of those pipes on the first floor, you would have got it all over the floor, all over the tile, all over the hardwood. The next idea is to go on the second floor to start snaking this drain. But because the second floor is so high and the coils that we're using are so heavy, there's a chance that if we start snaking from the second floor, we won't be able to pull out the snake, especially if it gets caught in the septic tank. So because of those variables, we eventually decide, screw it, go into the basement, cut this pipe, and pray for the best. So we cut this pipe and splash works begins. Imagine your favorite water park you've ever been. That's what it was like in this basement, because it was entirely full of water. And fortunately, luckily, We had a bucket nearby, a big one, almost like one of those big garbage bins we basically had. And water was going into this, so we caught as much as we could. But I have to tell you guys something. There is no way to describe the smell that came from this septic tank, because it was rancid. And it makes a lot of sense. It's not going anywhere. It goes in the septic tank. Bacteria is put in to decompose it, but it just stays there. And the methane just builds and builds and stays and builds. I mean, I have, out of 4 years of experiencing plumbing, this was the first time that I realized that this smell alone was something that I have never experienced before in 4 years. And before I did this video, I came up to my dad, I told him the scenario of what this video was going to be, and I was like, what was one of the worst ones? Right away, he also brought this one up, because that smell was unparalleled by any other drain call that we've ever had. Drain call number 2. Here's a really interesting one. We get a call from a couple of guys that own a couple of restaurants, okay? We're called to go into this restaurant that's having a terrible backup, but we can't make it. We're so busy that essentially we tell them, look, we're just not able to make it in the day. Like it's just not possible, that we're that busy that we can't make it later on. So they're like, it's okay. What we're gonna do is they're gonna go into the basement. They're gonna open the clean out so that people can continue going to the washroom and it doesn't stop them from closing the restaurant down. So let me explain to you what this means if you already don't get it. It basically means that they went downstairs, they opened the pipe, left it completely wide open, so that now everything that was clogging it up starts coming out into the basement of this place. Not only that, but they left the washrooms open. They didn't put signs that they were out of order, so people were still going to the washroom, and all that water and all that debris was still going into this basement. This wins the award for the worst way to problem solve in the entire world when it comes to plumbing. What a terrible idea. Nonetheless, they didn't want to call another plumbing company, apparently. So we get down into this basement, and I kid you not, the entire basement is covered in everything that you think it's covered in right now. You know that thing that you're thinking right now? That's exactly what was all over the floor. There was toilet paper, there was all of that. So here's the hardest part. Here's the most difficult part about this job that we're talking about. The most difficult part about this job was that it's in the basement of this place. The stairs are really steep, and the length of the pipe that we had to go was substantial. Not only that, this is a reoccurring issue. So we ended up renting a drain camera that day, bringing the drain camera downstairs and looking through the pipe to see if we'd run into anything that was an issue. We spent probably an hour to an hour and a half working with this drain camera, learning to use it and learning to find out where it was ending up. Afterwards, we had to go get our drain machine, bring it downstairs and start snaking. And snaking took a long time too. It took another hour maybe. So needless to say, we stayed there for a really long time. And the big problem with that is that you're standing there and it's completely methane gas the entire day. So you're essentially inhaling methane the entire time. And the difficulty with that is that methane actually makes humans sick. It gives people headaches. It makes people nauseous. It causes a lot of bad things. So we finished the drain. We found out with the drain camera that it wasn't that bad of an issue. It's just, it was just timing. We couldn't make it the day that it actually started happening. And then they decide to open up the cleanup, blah, blah, blah. We finish it all. And then later in the day, I realized I had this terrible headache. And I didn't understand why. It's not very common for me to get headaches. I gotta say that. Headaches are very rare for me. So I have this headache. And we're on a different job site doing a different thing, and all of a sudden I get the need to burp, and I burp, and when I burp I breathe in and I realize that it smells exactly like the drain call that we had spent a couple of hours at, which means that I had ingested so much methane that it was causing a headache. And every time I burped, it actually relieved me of this gas So, and then later on in the day, I kept burping and I kept smelling the methane gas, and I thought like stepped in something or like my jeans got hit with it or something like that. And I came to realize that I was actually sort of poisoned a little bit by the methane gas, and that throughout the day I was burping it up, and I realized that is the grossest thing that has ever happened to me. Another side note that I gotta say about this job site in particular was that it was so messy. There was so much liquid on the floor combined with all those terrible things that you imagine to be in this liquid, that at one point, when you snake a drain, a lot of times you use something called a whip. And a whip's intended to keep the coil inside a contained little space. It's basically a tunnel that the coil goes in so that when it spins, it doesn't hit anybody or it doesn't go off. Well, we weren't using the whip this day because the whip would have gotten dirty with everything on the floor. But what happened is that my dad starts spinning this thing, and it's in a puddle, and all of a sudden it starts spinning and it blasts me in the face with all the liquid that was on the floor, and you can only imagine what sort of bacteria was inside that. And all I remember doing was going like this. I got blasted, I kept my mouth and my eyes closed, and I tried to make my way out of that room where the coil was spinning. It was a complete disaster. The third one is not as bad as the first two, but it happened recently and it's a bit vivid in my mind. There was a brand new house that was just built for a friend of ours. He ends up calling us on a Sunday going, look, all the water's in the basement, you gotta come and help me out. So we show up with our drain machine and we get to the basement and it's completely full of water, and obviously it's dirty water. So when we get there, we have to go see the backflow preventer. So what's suggested for new houses now is that they put a backflow preventer on the drain just before it goes outside your house. And the reason why they do this is because when there's torrential rain, the storm drains cannot handle the volume. A lot of times what happens is it comes into the house and it fills up the basement, and this will happen for an entire street if the storm drains are not big enough in the street. And I think insurance, you get some sort of insurance benefit for it because you're basically stopping a potential flood inside your basement, right? So there's a couple of good reasons to do this, and I completely suggest it if you have the money. Here's what happens. We had to go check out this guy's backflow preventer because the guy moved into the house the night before. This was literally just one night in the house. This shouldn't be happening. So we get to the backflow preventer, and we sort of diagnose that that's probably where the issues kind of started and having it. And we start unscrewing it. And when we unscrew it, you ever seen those volcano projects that kids do where they like mix a couple of liquids, and it was like that. Like a bunch of everything came out of the backflow preventer like this, and it went, and it was overflowing like a volcano like project that you've seen like on TV. It was just insane. It was one of those things where me, my dad, and this guy in his own basement had to step back because we were worried we were gonna get blasted in the face. So those are a few hilarious stories that have happened to me over time, and that's over the duration of about 4 or 5 years. But let me get to the question at hand and answer your final question, Plum Life. I realize there are so many different types of plumbing, but I'm curious about what your perspective is, especially since you mentioned you primarily work in service. Now, here's something I want to say to that sentence right there. You're absolutely correct. People that work in new construction or just construction in general don't really have to deal with drain calls. It's very much so a service plumbing field. It's guys that do drain calls that are gonna get the uncleanliness aspect of the plumbing issue, you know what I'm saying? So that's one thing to keep in mind. If you're really squeamish about this whole topic in general, about drains and sticking your hand in or snaking them, then you gotta realize there are still aspects of plumbing that you can do that you will never ever have to deal with that like in new construction. So that's something you gotta, it's a big problem for anybody out there, don't worry about it, just go into a different field of it. But being service plumbers, my dad and I, somebody calls us for a drain call, that's how we get paid. We go snake the drain, we unclog it, we test it, make sure everything's running well, and we get paid for that. It's not pretty work, but look, we make a living out of it, so it does it. Another thing I want to mention is that one thing that's amazing to me is, especially when we were doing the septic tank story I was telling you about, we cut this pipe, and remember, this pipe is above our heads, and it's spraying down into this garbage can. And that was a moment where I realized that there's a part in my head, and a part in my dad's head, and a part in, I think, everybody's head that's very survival, where I smelled what I smelled, I realized what was happening, but I completely switched off. And I think that's just a survival mechanism where the part in my head that's repulsed by it, you know, that really wants to go, oh, this is gross, I can't believe this is happening. I sort of shut that off in moments like that because I'm incapable of doing the job if I don't. You know what I'm saying? If you are completely aware of what's happening and you keep reminding yourself in your head, it's very difficult to finish that job, because that job is one of those moments where, you know, people have a potential to feel sorry for themselves under these circumstances. Look, of course, you're dealing with something that, according to society, is gross, right? And we're the people doing it. So what I find amazing is that there are defense mechanisms we have, especially mental ones, that allow you to go beyond that barrier of fear and of uncomfort that'll allow you to finish the job. And that's one thing you got to keep in mind. You might be sitting down thinking to yourself that I could never do that, but I'm confident that actually you probably could. It's just a matter of how uncomfortable are you willing to feel, or how fast will you be able to switch off. You know what I'm saying? That's one thing that I found pretty amazing about this job. I'd be particularly interested to get your thoughts on the topic and maybe hear of good and bad experiences. Well, I told you the experiences, but here's what I have to say on the topic and my thoughts on it. Like I said, your mind switches off and you're able to do the work because you're in work mode. You know what I mean? You're sort of just going through the motion and doing the things you need to do to get everything done as efficiently as possible. But there are some important things we have to know. It is crucial that when you're a service plumber, and I got this from my teacher at plumbing school as well, that you're up to date on your shots and your immunities. There was a kid in plumbing school I went to in first year that was telling us a story about how he once cut a drain and everything in the drain had spilt on him, and he got very sick after that. He actually had inflammation in his throat, blah, blah, blah. He had to go to the hospital, and he was hospitalized for a little while. Look, the scary part is you are dealing with bacteria here. And I think that's where the entire fear around going to the washroom came from in society. We think about people going to the washroom, and we also think bacteria at the same time. And unfortunately, it is the case where bacteria and fecal matter have an association together, and that's why we're so afraid of it. So it is important to make sure that you get your hepatitis shots and stuff like that, because you do not want to run into something like that and get sick like that. You know what I'm saying? So in trades in general, tetanus shots are really important because you deal with nails and rusted things all the time. Hepatitis shots, if you can get them sort of thing. It's something that you got to keep in mind because you are dealing with stuff that can be potentially harmful. And those are my thoughts on that, peeps. I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope it was informative and a little bit fun, because looking back on those stories now, it's hilarious. It's only when you're in the situation that you're going, what the heck did I get myself into? I chose this career? Are you serious? So peeps, look, it's part of the game. We all go through it. I would love to hear your stories if you are plumbers out there that have experienced anything like that. But look, in a sense, there's a nobility to it because you are going there, you are doing something that is challenging, not only physically, but also mentally as well, because you're dealing with your own insecurities, your own fears, and you're doing something that a lot of people wouldn't do. So there's a sense of pride I do have to doing drain calls and being a plumber. And that's something that was unexpected for me. You know, there came a point where I realized that there was this pride that I had, where I went, you know, I wasn't expecting that. And there's something really amazing about not being afraid of those things, and about just completely being able to go in, do a drain call, walk out, wash your hands, and be completely okay about it. You know what I'm saying? One last thing I want to say is that if you're going to get into drain calls and stuff like that, do me a favor. Wear gloves.